The Polish government has announced that instead of Wibor, the Warsaw Interbank offered rate, it will introduce a new benchmark index, promising lower values than Wibor, which will reduce the loan repayment burden on borrowers. This new index, which will shortly be also used for calculating installments on PLN loans taken out by entrepreneurs and companies, will be described by Konrad Werner, attorney at law, counsel in Wardyński and Partners Banking and Finance Practice. Then, I will summarize Poland's current economic situation in a couple of sentences. We address this program to foreigners, acting as board members in Polish companies, foreign investors in Poland, and their foreign advisors.
Hi. In the last year or so, inflation has been soaring in Poland, and so have interest rates. This has translated into serious difficulties for borrowers of floating rate loans denominated in Polish zloty, residential mortgage loans in particular. In April 2022, the government announced a plan to help borrowers consisting of 4 pillars, one of which was the replacement of Wibor with an alternative reference rate based on rates used for wholesale overnight deposits. This was meant to reduce the interest payable on floating rate PLN debt that currently references the Wibor rate, as the new replacement rate was to be lower than the Wibor rate. Some government experts even hinted that the new rate would only replace the Wibor rate in residential mortgage loans, while the Wibor rate would continue to be calculated and would not be replaced in, for instance, corporate loans or bonds. However, those early proposals did not take into account that the calculation and usage, as well as the potential replacement of the Wibor rate, are strictly regulated by the EU regulation commonly known as BMR. What does this mean in practice? First of all, it means that it is not possible for the regulator to replace Wibor with an alternative rate in only some categories of contracts, such as residential mortgage loans, while maintaining it in other types of contracts. What is more, the replacement procedure set out in the BMR regulation requires that the calculation and publication of the old reference rate is entirely discontinued on the date of replacement. In other words, the replacement of the Wibor rate must and will impact not only individuals with residential mortgage loans, but the vast majority of debtors and creditors of floating rate debt that references the Wibor rate. But what precisely will that impact be? Will the economic balance between lender and creditor be affected by the replacement of the reference rate? It would seem that it should, given that the reform was initially presented by the government as one of the ways to decrease the burden of high interest rates affecting borrowers. However, replacing reference rates under BMR is not intended to alter the economic balance between debtors and creditors resulting from what they have agreed in their financing documentation. To the contrary, the current golden standard when replacing reference rates under BMR is to use a so-called spread adjustment whenever using the new rate in place of the old one would lead to an economically different outcome for the parties. The spread adjustment is typically calculated as the median daily difference between the old rate and the new rate calculated over a 5-year look-back period. In other words, yes, the replacement of Wibor will affect almost everyone with any type of contract that references Wibor, but no, this will not mean that borrowers will suddenly start paying less interest and get an administratively imposed advantage over lenders. So, what happens next? In July 2022, the National Working Group on the Reform of Reference Rates was constituted and entrusted with the task of reference rate reform in Poland. The working group has recently indicated Wiron, a reference rate calculated on the basis of data from the overnight wholesale PLN deposit market, as the replacement rate for Wibor. This replacement will thus in fact follow the worldwide trend of replacing so-called IBOR rates with so-called RFRs, i.e. risk-free rates. IBOR rates are forward-looking rates offered for interbank deposits with a certain tenor, such as 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, etc. RFRs, on the other hand, are backward-looking rates, typically based on rates used in actual transactions on the overnight wholesale deposit market. RFRs are generally considered more transparent, more representative of the market they are intended to measure, and less prone to manipulation. The working group has also indicated that the transition from Wibor to Wiron will involve a spread adjustment, calculated precisely in the standard manner described a few moments ago. In other words, the economic balance between debtors and creditors should in principle not be affected. The date when all references to Wibor in existing contracts will be replaced by Wiron by operation of law is likely to be 1st January 2025. However, banks will be encouraged by the regulator to start using the new Wiron rate in new agreements already in 2023. Companies will need to prepare for this, especially that the methodology of calculating interest on a loan or other debt instrument using Wiron, being a backward-looking overnight RFR, will differ significantly from how interest is calculated on the basis of a traditional forward-looking term rate, such as Wibor. That difference will need to be reflected in the wording of financing agreements. What companies will also need to consider and analyze are any fallback clauses in their existing and new financing agreements. Fallback clauses in financing agreements are designed to indicate a replacement rate whenever an existing rate referenced in the agreement is discontinued. If a fallback clause fulfills certain requirements set out in the BMR regulation, it can override the replacement of a discontinued rate affected on the basis of BMR. In other words, when Wibor is replaced by Wiron by operation of law on the basis of the BMR regulation in 2025, it is possible that, in some agreements with fallback clauses, the replacement rate will actually not be Wiron, but another rate, indicated on the basis of the fallback clause. Therefore, in order for companies to properly understand their legal and financial position in connection with the discontinuation of the Wibor rate, they will need to look closely at their existing financing agreements and get an understanding of any fallback clauses that such agreements contain. They will also need to understand how to interpret and possibly negotiate fallback clauses in any new financing agreements that they enter into.
The drastic increase in interest rates over the past year has led to a significant decline in the creditworthiness of households. Estimates put this by as much as 40–60%. Consequently, there has been a decline to date of 50% compared to 2021 in the sale of new homes on credit. As a result, developers have halted new developments, thus protecting themselves against falling prices and margins. Several important sectors of the economy are dependent on construction, so a halt on new housing developments is soon likely to cause a decline in orders to construction companies and to manufacturers of building materials, interior furnishings, furniture, and brown and white goods. Thank you for watching this episode. See you soon.